Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's jump into today's episode. Welcome, everybody. We have Heather Whelpley with us today, and I'm particularly excited because we are both Minnesotans at heart, and I think originally, right, Heather?
Yes, I am originally Minnesotan, currently living
Yeah.
in Colorado, but definitely originally a Minnesotan.
I love it. I love it. So I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me, Karen. I'm excited to be here and to talk about whatever we're going to dive into and all the things today. So I am a speaker and an award-winning author that works with women to break the rules that we are handed that tell us we have to prove our worth through likability and achievement and success and desirability and all these other forms of being good, good girls, good women, so that we can take up more space and use our voices to impact change and simply to have more joy and freedom in our lives as well. And that's my personal journey is, originally being the consummate overachiever, overdoer, and finally stopping to ask myself, like, why am I doing all this and where is it really coming from? And then from there, looking at all the rules that we tend to get handed, some of which have to do with gender, some of which don't at all, and saying, which of these do I want to keep carrying with me and which ones do I want to break? And the freedom that came on the other side of asking those questions. And I mentioned that I'm an author. So I have two books. One is an Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules. And then the second one, which will be out later in the fall, hopefully late October, early November, is called Grounded Wildness. And they are about both of this topic of breaking the rules on purpose or with purpose, to have more joy and freedom and to use our voices with greater confidence, which I know is what you are all about as well.
I
So
know. Yeah, we're so aligned. I love it. I want
yes.
to find out from you, as freedom is such an important value for me.
Mhm.
And when did you first, because first, and just a little context, I want to tell everybody too. I saw Heather speak at a conference that we were both speaking at, and it was so good, so revealing, but also so relatable. It's one of those, oh my gosh, she gets me, she gets
Yes.
me. And I know anybody that's listened to you and feels the same way because it is such a powerful and relatable message.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. When did you first break the rules purposely?
Oh, I mean, that's an interesting question because I think there's probably two parts to that. So
Okay.
within my career, when my undergraduate degree is conservation biology, not a typical degree in any way, shape, or form, particularly considering what I do now. And so, even though I was this kind of typical overachiever in many ways, I was the valedictorian in my high school class and captain of two sports and, all of those types of things in my career initially, I had no interest in following a typical path. So I broke a lot of those rules early in my adulthood of, I taught environmental education out on the East Coast and I led outdoor trips with teenagers in Colorado and Utah and California and gap year semesters abroad in Central and South America. Like I did not have a typical, I did seasonal work essentially for my first 3 or 4 years out of college. I really didn't live anywhere particularly, or I lived multiple places, depending on how you want to define that. And so I didn't break, I broke a lot of rules, I think, at that beginning stages of my career. And then I really swung really hard in the other direction. And I went from being this total, kind of nomad and just doing what felt really good. And I wanted to have some roots after that. So don't get me wrong. It was a purposeful decision. I went back to grad school at the University of Minnesota. I got a master's of education in human resource development. And I went to work for one of the biggest companies in the entire world. And so I swung from one direction to the other. And I think, there were so many great things about working for that company, as well as the next large company that I worked for. I worked in HR and leadership development and had a lot of really, really wonderful opportunities. And what was also true is that it was a re-indoctrination into some rules about
Mhm.
how I was supposed to use my voice and not supposed to use my voice. And, feedback that I got that I took way too much to heart, that I could be too direct and should rein myself in a little bit. And, I wouldn't ever say that I was inauthentic, but I filtered myself a bit. So it was
Okay.
more like, I kind of showed like 70 or 80% of myself. And that part was authentic, what I was sharing, but it wasn't the fullness of me. So when I think about like full authenticity or fullness of my voice, it was constrained a bit. And really, when I started to break those rules that I talk about, like these proving, pleasing, and perfecting rules, I think one of the first ones was when my job changed and I started to think about what do I really want in my career? And I decided to leave and start a business, which was, I was on a trajectory, I was on a path, and I was breaking the rule of kind of the next should and supposed to in my career. And that led to like just the next 5 years of breaking rules time and time again, and really getting clear on, yeah, like my worth is not connected to achievement. My worth is not connected to success. It's also not connected to how my body looks and how I'm showing up and how I look in the world. And a lot of those rules that women are handed that can cause us a lot of shame and feeling like we're not enough or too much and all of these different things. So yeah, the last 5 or 6 years of my life have been a continual journey to break more and more rules that our culture hands us, and so that I can come more into my authenticity and my own freedom while creating greater impact with my work, because that is also what has happened as I've broken these rules telling me that like I have to achieve, I have to be successful, I have to look a certain way, not allowed to disappoint anyone. I mean, all of these things, I have both, yeah, followed my own freedom and created greater impact because it's more true and it's more authentic. Like you said, everyone resonates with those rules because we are all handed them, as I was too. And getting to call them out is a part of creating change, and understanding the rules that you have been handed or anyone who's listening to this has been handed, and then purposely starting to break the ones that no longer work for you. You automatically get to be part of creating change by doing that. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's been a lot of breaking rules. A two-parter to that.
I
Two-part
love
answer
it.
to that
I love
question.
it. Awesome. Well, give us some tips. How can we do this? Give us some how-tos.
Yeah, on breaking the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to recognize which rules you are handed. And this is when I do that keynote on creating your own rules for success, and also discover your authentic voice, because that's another keynote of mine where I talk about the rules that tell us to hold back. And it's to understand which rules you have been handed. There's some similarities, but there's also some differences. So on the proving side, you might feel like I'm not the smartest in the room, so I have to work the hardest, or I have to be productive all the time. I'm not allowed to rest. I don't need any help, or I'll be a burden if I ask for help. Those are kind of some of those proving rules. Under the pleasing rules is like, I'm not allowed to disappoint anyone. I
Mm.
should just nod and go along. I have to be polite. Nice girls don't get angry.
Oh,
I have to be responsible for everyone and take care of everyone and keep everyone happy. I mean, all of these rules, and the perfecting ones are like it has to be perfect before I can share it, or I'm not allowed to make mistakes. I have to keep everything under control and together all the time. And interestingly, there's this fourth category that I didn't talk about in creating your own rules for success in the speaking engagement that we did together, because I didn't know it's coming out in my next book, which is Grounded Wildness. And it's rebelling against those rules is another way of kind of performing in our lives, like to purposefully go in the opposite direction, not because it feels good to you, but just to break the rules, which is less common, but I do still see it. So I wanted to bring it up as like pushing against those rules instead of sinking into what's actually true for you. So I think the first tip is just to, to sit back and say, like, what resonated with you out of what I just said of those rules, and to start thinking about what were the things you were told as a kid, or what were the lessons you got about what does success mean? What does failure mean? What are you allowed to talk about? What are you not allowed to talk about? What is this definition you were handed of what it means to be a good person, a good woman, a good mom, a good leader, a good employee? And do you want to keep holding to that? And it's not about throwing everything out the window. Sometimes we're handed really, really good rules. I definitely got some great rules about, being bold and using my voice as a kid, and they got eroded along the way, but I got some really, and they were propped up too. Parts of it were eroded and parts were propped up. But I got some great rules as a kid, and I don't want to throw those away. I don't need to throw everything away, but I want to choose. I want to choose and say, what rules are actually helpful to me and to the impact I want to create and how I want to show up in the world. and what are not, what are disempowering, what are causing shame, what are causing me to feel stressed or anxiety. That really what I need to do is change the definition and change the rules. And so that's the biggest tip, is to start recognizing that, and then really to over time tap back into yourself, create some space to listen to your voice and to listen to who you are and what you want, which is probably a whole program in and of itself, but to create that
Yeah.
space to listen to yourself again and choose,
Mhm.
where do you want to follow the rules and where do you want to start to break them, and then to do
Mhm.
so purposefully, often uncomfortably, and to move forward in that way. And that's how we create new rules for ourselves, is to break the old ones on purpose and start to follow some new ones. And it's super uncomfortable at the beginning, and it also gets less uncomfortable over time. And that's where the freedom comes in as well, of knowing you
Yeah,
can break those
exactly.
rules.
Well,
Yeah.
I think of one that I love to offer, which is to say,
Yeah.
here's my vote. So, for example, when you're in a meeting and you're not used to speaking up or sharing your opinion, and this was what I taught myself because I was that Minnesota girl. You accommodate everybody else, but I've also come to realize this is not a Minnesota thing. This is such a female quality for
Yes, it is.
so many of us.
I do think Minnesotans might have it a little bit more than the average than the average person, or at least some other parts of the United States. But yes, it does span across many regions for sure.
I know it is amazing. But I remember feeling so uncomfortable sharing my opinion. And I remember my boss one time just shocked me by saying, "You always come to the meetings with, here's all the research, or here are all of the option. What does everybody else think?" And she goes, "I want to know what you think."
Ooh,
And that just made my jaw drop. And so what felt good for me, which is why it's diplomatic and it's direct to say, here's my vote. And I
love
remember the
that.
first time I said it and I thought, oh my gosh, okay, nobody died.
Yeah.
I think they
Yes.
actually respected me more by that. So I wanted to mention that that is also one that I have learned that I found to be really helpful, and one of the concepts that I teach as well. It's
I love that. So I love what you said around, like, no one died and they maybe even respected me more for it. And this is part of creating those new rules, is you're getting that evidence of, like, oh wait, it's okay for me to share my opinion and say, here's my vote. I survived, everyone else survived. Sometimes people might disagree with you, but that's okay too. Like, that's okay. And
exactly.
you even got some greater respect out of it. So it's like your brain gains this evidence of, like, oh, that new rule is actually okay to follow. I don't have to keep following the old one. It was
Yeah.
uncomfortable to break it, but it's going to be less uncomfortable the next time around, because it's gaining that evidence that the new rule is actually way more true than the old rule ever was.
Ah, that is gold. What you just said. How about an example from your life? Can you drop us into a moment?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I'm trying to think of a specific example of where I've broken the rule. So, okay, a great example here is around work-life balance for me. So I was, I talked about always being the overachiever, overdoer. I had terrible boundaries during my corporate career. Terrible. I never said no to anything. And they got better as time went on, but that was only because I got so burned out that, like, I was literally getting sick at times because I had such poor boundaries and I just wasn't
Oh,
having those conversations. And also, part of my personality is I'm really enthusiastic and I genuinely like to be involved in everything. So when you combine those two, it's a recipe for burnout, of, like, not knowing how to set boundaries and actually wanting to be involved, but not realizing there's no human way to actually be involved in everything. And then these rules on top of it, feeling like, oh, I need to be productive all the time. I need to, I always have to be doing more and saying yes to everything.
mhm.
And I think two examples come to mind. So one from my corporate career and then one from my business. So one in my corporate career, at one job I was at, this was probably 8 years into my 10-year corporate career. I was on a global team. And so people were sending emails all the time. And I
Mm,
realized that I was getting in this habit of checking email. This was before I had this whole idea of the rules, but one of my rules that I was following was like, well, I better check email every single night at like 9 p.m. unless I have plans, unless I'm out. I got in this habit of doing, 30 or 40 minutes of email, often with the TV on, just kind of checking in and getting caught up. And I realized I don't want to be doing this. Like, this is not how I want to spend my time. This is not how I want to be spending the ends of my evenings. And I don't really want to be a person who works every single evening. That's not how I want it to be in the world. And I
Yeah.
thought, I'm going to break this rule by just experimenting once,
Ooh.
just once. I'm going to experiment with breaking this habit, with breaking this rule and seeing what happens. So just one night, I was like, not going to check email. I'm at home, but I'm not going to check email. And I walked into work the next day without having checked anything. It was uncomfortable. And just like you said, I survived. And not only did I survive, everything that was important got done that day. Maybe because time expands to the thing, our what we do expands the time that we give it. Maybe because I slept better. And so I was able to be more focused and productive the next day. I don't know. I don't know the exact reasons, but it really was fine. And so then I was like, okay, let's experiment again and let's do it again and again. And were there a few times after that that I legitimately did have things I needed to sit down and get done at night? Of course, but not often. Most of the time, I had to learn like this is a habit and a rule I can break for myself. And also, just because other people frequently, either globally, because they're in a different time zone, or just American culture of checking email every night, just because so other people are doing it doesn't mean I have to do it as well. Like I can break that norm, that rule,
Yes.
and experimenting with it, kind of taking on that attitude of experimentation allowed for a more playful and less permanent and less pressurized decision. It was like, I'm just going to try it once and see what happens. And then I can repeat if it's working or I can adjust. And I like taking that attitude to things of experimentation because it helps with some of the perfectionism too. Like I'm just trying it out. We're just trying it out. It's not a permanent decision that has to be forever. I'm just experimenting. So that was one quick example from my corporate career. And then just quickly in my business, when I really started to dive deep into this, I created a new rule for myself that's really an overarching rule in my life, which is I am worthy for who I am, not what I do. And
Oh,
when I
yes.
listen to that, yeah, when I really listen to that and act on it, then I'm allowed to like go for a hike in the middle of the afternoon. And I used to feel a guilty pull back to my computer when I did that. And I don't anymore. I don't feel that guilty pull back to my
Oh,
computer. So those are, some of those I think rule breaking and also seeing the transition of like it's uncomfortable and then it becomes less uncomfortable because you actually start to believe the new rule. But both those were related to, my own well-being and work-life balance. And yeah, learning how to break those rules we're handed that tells we always have to be on and always have to be productive and doing things all the time. We don't have to be on and doing things all the time.
right. Exactly. That is it's such a good example. And I'm remembering one of the times when I had this reaction on the other side of someone's boundary where I went, what? It was so fascinating. And I thought I could never do that. And it was a woman who had an auto reply in the middle of the day that said, I check my emails at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. If you need anything urgent, this is my number. Otherwise, I will
Oh,
get back to you. It was so boundaried. I thought, oh my gosh, I was practically bowing down to her.
that's amazing. I love that. And
I
I
know.
like that she offered a way to get in touch with her if it really was urgent, but most of the time it's not. So she's just
Right,
setting an expectation. And I find that's true with boundaries in general. Like most we think people are going to care way
right.
more than they end up caring.
Oh,
Occasionally someone gets annoyed and usually that person's not at work. Usually that person's a family member. But they're annoyed, but not usually it's like, oh, okay. I've even said like I get a lot of requests for, networking and that kind of thing. And sometimes I love to do that. And
mhm.
sometimes I can't because I would spend all my time networking and not getting the bigger work done. And so I've taken to actually telling people either what's going on or just to say, hey, I'm working on setting better boundaries. And this is something I need to say no to. I really appreciate you saying no or reaching out, but it's something I need to say no to. And
Yeah,
usually I get a really positive response to that because almost everyone is working on setting boundaries. And so
exactly.
they appreciate the honesty and openness and about it. So yeah, I love that. I
I
don't do
know.
that, but I'm also kind of intrigued by is
Yeah.
there a way I can communicate a stronger boundary like she did?
Yeah, when
Yeah.
it's so strong like that. And I love what you said about being honest about I'm working on
Mhm.
better boundaries. And I've done something similar. And I remember the person just going, Noted. Like, 'cause
Yeah.
it was one of those trying to schedule with me and the back and forth. And I said, I need to honor why I hired someone to help me with scheduling.
Yes.
So anyway, it's fascinating, all of these nuances. And have you seen the movie Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret?
I haven't, but I really would love to. I mean, I
Can,
read the book when I was
can I
probably in
okay.
fourth or fifth grade, but it's been a long time.
I have to share a scene, and I don't think it'll ruin it. I think you'll just probably get a greater appreciation when you see it. I loved it so much. I just saw it on the plane. This particular scene, I recorded it closed captions so that I could keep it like exactly, because it was such a powerful boundary. So this woman, a mom, was or was raising her hand for every committee at the school to be volunteering for. She ends up getting rallied into cutting about 10,000 stars out of felt.
All right. This sounds really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And fundraising and all these things. So that's all done. Then later she sees the head of the school committee picking place, whatever, and says, "Oh," she comes to the other woman that did all this work and said, "I am so glad I bumped into you. I was just going to call you. There are 3 committees that I can see you being perfect for." And the mom says, "Oh, gosh, I would love to, but to have a nice day."
Yes.
And
I love that. Yes.
she had this dramatic pause right before she said, "I want to." And I thought it was the most brilliant, honest, wonderful way. And then you see her getting into her car and just having this glow about her of,
Yes.
"Oh, I did it."
Because there's so much freedom. Like there's so much freedom with saying no. And I love that. Like, because I think too often of like this kind of question of what would you rather? Like, would you rather say
Mm.
no and feel maybe guilty about it or uncomfortable with saying no? Or do you want the resentment of having said yes and the
Oh,
overwhelm of having said yes? And because they're like, there's a
yes.
challenge on both sides. So it's like, which challenge do you want to sign up for? And which one's going to lead to more freedom, even if it's also uncomfortable at the same time? So I love that. And I can just picture her face of like, oh, freedom, freedom. I don't want to. I'm going to say no because I don't want to. And that's enough. That's enough. That's enough of a reason.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
I love the fact, though, I was laughing because I must have rewound it about 3 times, and then I showed it to my husband when I came home. I mean, boundaries has always been a challenge for me, but I've
It's
gotten a little
hard.
better. Well, tell us about your book before we wrap up here.
Yeah. So the book is called Grounded Wildness. And so if my first book, which was called An Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules, is about breaking those rules that tie our worth to success and productivity and perfectionism and achievement, that ended up just being part 1 of my own journey and the journey that I've been on in my speaking and coaching and other things with women as well. I didn't realize it at the time that it was only a part 1, but it really was. And really that was the first set of types of rules I was aware of and that I was breaking. And little did I know that there was a deep dive coming after that that really broke everything open in my life. And truly, to be completely frank and honest, it started with that next round. The round 2 started with my body and with dating. And I'm single and have long felt I used to be in a much larger body when I was in middle school, high school, and college. And the messages at that time were like, thinner is better. Thinner is what is beautiful. Thinner is what is desirable. And I did not fit that. And therefore, I felt very ashamed of my body, but also ashamed of myself because I felt like, what's wrong with me that I couldn't control this, that I couldn't just get thinner, that I couldn't control my eating. And I felt, even though and this shouldn't matter, but even though I did lose weight as an adult, I still carried that around with me. I carried a lot of that kind of what's wrong with me. And even though I was confident in 90% of my life, I really, this one part of me was really, there was a lot of shame and a lot of healing that needed to happen there. And it was through a dating experience that I did a deep dive and really realized, like, wait a second, I was never broken. It was the rules that were handed to me that were broken. It was the messages about what a woman's body is supposed to look like that were broken, not me. I was never the one that was broken. And that realization just expanded from not just my body, but also how I'm using my voice and how I'm showing up in the world, and related it back to achievement. Of those rules were also broken, tying our worth to achievement and success, and tying our worth to always being there for everyone all of the time, and pleasing, and having to make everything perfect, and all of these different ways that we are taught that we are supposed to show up in the world. And when I had that deep realization, what came out on the other side of that, through, therapy and tears and journaling and all of
Right.
these things, some really deep personal work, was this feeling of freedom that I call grounded wildness, which is the title of the book, of being so grounded in myself that I'm allowed to be completely free in the world. Now, am I completely free 100% of the time? No, there's things I'm still working on. And it's a freedom that I feel a freedom every day now that I did not know was possible just a few years ago. And that is really what the book is about, is part memoir of my personal journey, but that relates to almost everyone out there. And then also practices on getting grounded and wild in your own life so that you can reconnect into yourself, separate from those rules that you were handed, to feel more alive and have more joy and take up space and really claim yourself in this world, and show up in your fullness without holding back, without dimming your light, without and carrying that shame anymore that never came from you. It came from the rules.
Yes.
So
Wow.
that is grounded wildness, and it should be out late October, hopefully, crossing my fingers, or if not, for sure November.
Yay. Well, I am so happy for you, Heather. It's wonderful, and happy for the world that you have had all of these discoveries, that you've put it into a package that people can buy and get their own freedom. So thank you for serving the world the way that you do.
Thank you. You as well. I know, like you said before,
Yeah.
we're pretty aligned in what we're what we're going
I
for. And
know,
so
it's
it's
wonderful.
great that
Well,
we
where
can
can
have
they
these
reach you? Where can
conversations.
we? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. The best place is my website, which is heatherwhelpley.com, because on there you can find information about my speaking. Both my books are available or will be available. The hardcovers there. And there'll be links to Amazon if you prefer the ebook, audiobook, or paperback as well. My podcast, which is called Grounded Wildness, is also on there, and of course available on all the typical platforms as well. But the website is definitely the one-stop shopping for all of the information. And then if you want to connect on social media, LinkedIn is definitely my best place. I'm occasionally on Instagram, but it's real hit or miss. But LinkedIn, I'm very consistent with. And so that's a great place to reach out and to connect there, to send me a message there. I read all my messages and would love to hear from you. So website, heatherwhelpley.com, and then LinkedIn for connecting on social media.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Heather.
Thank you, Karen. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.